Michael Hayes, a single father and retired Army veteran, entered the courthouse with the weight of 1,000 battles on his shoulders. The scars on his body told one story, but the deeper scars were the ones no one could see, raising his young daughter alone after his wife's passing. For years, he had been a silent soldier off the battlefield, navigating the maze of civilian life and fighting for stability. He thought he had left war behind, but today, inside this courtroom, war found him again. He had come to testify in a small but important hearing, a case involving police misconduct in his community. Michael had seen too much in his service to ignore injustice. But as he sat quietly in the wooden benches, his sharp instincts picked up on something no ordinary man would have noticed. At the defense table sat a young woman in her 30s, fragile in appearance but resolute in her eyes. She had spoken out against several corrupt officers, and today was supposed to be her chance to seek justice. Suddenly, the air shifted. Two uniformed officers approached her table not to protect, but to intimidate. The murmurs in the courtroom fell silent as the officers whispered threats too low for the judge to hear. When she refused to back down, their intimidation turned to violence. One officer gripped her arm hard enough to leave a bruise, and the other shoved her back into her chair. Gasps rippled through the room. But the judge banged the gavel not to stop the abuse, but to silence the crowd. "Order in my court," he snapped coldly. Michael's fists clenched. He had seen this before, in war-torn villages where power crushed the weak. He thought of his daughter sitting at home, counting on him to come back safe. He thought of every oath he had ever taken. He couldn't sit still. In one swift motion, Michael stood, his commanding voice echoing through the chamber. "Enough!" The officers sneered, dismissing him as just another civilian. But they didn't know who they were facing. Before either could react, Michael's military training surged to life. He moved like lightning, blocking a strike from one officer and disarming the other without throwing a single unnecessary punch. The room erupted in chaos. Lawyers shouted, the audience screamed, but Michael's focus never wavered. He shielded the woman with his body, his broad shoulders a wall between her and the men sworn to uphold the law. "If you want to touch her again," Michael growled, "you'll have to go through me." For a moment, time froze. The woman looked up at him, stunned not just by his strength, but by the rare sight of someone willing to risk everything for a stranger. Tears welled in her eyes, but she swallowed them back, too proud to show weakness. The judge slammed his gavel again, demanding control, but his words carried no weight anymore. Everyone in that room had seen the truth: the protectors had become the attackers, and a veteran had become the defender. Order was eventually restored, though tension buzzed through every corner of the courtroom. The officers were forced to step back, humiliated in front of the crowd. Michael guided the woman to her feet, steadying her trembling hands. The audience whispered in shock, unsure of what would happen next. Then, in a twist no one could have predicted, the bailiff entered with a file and quietly whispered something to the court clerk. Moments later, the clerk stood and cleared his throat. The Honorable Judge Elena Rivers presiding. The room went still. All eyes turned toward the very woman who had just been attacked. Michael blinked, confused. "You're the judge," he whispered. Elena Rivers straightened her back, brushing off the dust from her blazer. Gone was the vulnerable woman he had just defended. In her place stood a figure of authority, her eyes burning with a fire that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with justice. She walked to the bench with quiet power, her heels clicking against the floor like a drumbeat of destiny. The two officers who had manhandled her paled. Their smug arrogance dissolved into panic. The audience gasped again, realizing they had just witnessed a test of character and they had failed it before the very person who now held their fate. Elena sat in the judge's seat, her gavel resting firmly in her hand. She scanned the courtroom, her gaze falling finally on Michael. For a brief second, the mask of authority softened, and she gave him a look of gratitude that words could never capture. "Today," Judge Rivers declared, her voice steady as iron, "this court has seen corruption, intimidation, and abuse of power. But we have also seen bravery, honor, and sacrifice. This case is no longer about one complaint, it is about restoring faith in justice." The courtroom erupted in applause, the sound rolling like thunder through the walls. Michael stood quietly, his heart pounding. He hadn't expected gratitude, recognition, or even thanks. He had simply done what a soldier does: protect those who cannot protect themselves. But as he watched Judge Rivers slam the gavel, delivering rulings that would strip the corrupt officers of their badges and open investigations into their conduct, he felt something stir inside him. Later, as the courtroom emptied, Judge Rivers approached Michael. Her eyes were softer now, carrying the weight of unspoken things. "You didn't just save me," she said quietly. "You saved the very meaning of this courtroom." Michael shook his head humbly. "I just did what was right. That's all." But deep down, both of them knew the truth. Justice had been hanging by a thread, and in that critical moment, a single dad veteran had been the one to hold it together.